not been here with us, we watch the video first. Makes sense, right? I was telling Dan this before. We have been going through this for a while, and a lot of what we're learning is based on the foundations of what he's talked about. But let me just give you a very quick summary, and it's literally one word. Parenting is about your heart. That everything that we do is not about changing behavior, in other words, behavior modification, but it's about transforming what is inside. And we know that we're only a means to that end. It has to be the Spirit of God. And a lot of what we're doing is coming together and recognizing that there are certain things that we do sometimes that actually do not lead to a pointing to a change of heart, but rather we fixate ourselves more on circumstances and behavioral patterns. And so I think you'll see, Paul Tripp doing a good job of being able to describe that. Ann, you ready?
I'm sorry, I think I may have logged you out.
Uh-oh. Did you log out of my...
I accidentally did. I meant to sign into you.
Right.
Is that, no? I don't
No.
have to. Okay, never mind. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Nope, we're going.
Okay.
We're
You guys have been coming from the beginning.
All right. So here we go. You ready? So it's about 25 minutes.
So you click up there, yeah.
Which one here?
You have to sign
You do
in,
have to
right?
sign in.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me sign.
Okay.
Let me sign in.
Sorry about that.
Don't worry, man. I'm not worried that you're going to see my password or anything. You don't have to go so far away. Besides, so many numbers.
Okay.
Um,
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we will begin, and sorry everyone, we're going to hide the broadcast now, and we will be back. So, you're not going to be able to see it, Herman? Are you sure?
Oak Lesson looks empty.
Well, we want to end with this final stage. We've looked at the importance of authority. We've looked at the importance of development of character. What's going on now is internalization, is that the child begins this process where the standards of the home now become their standards, where it's not now I'm responding to your authority or I'm agreeing with your character standards. These are my decisions, my choices that I willingly make. And it's a transitional period of time. You're actually beginning the process of more concretely preparing your children for their emancipation from the home. And that is a very, very important stage. Now, you're going to be tempted to want to crank back the clock and treat this teenager like he's a 5-year-old. And it's very, very important, some of you will struggle with this, that you begin to give some a decision-making room for this child while he's still in the home. I'm not saying you totally remove your parental authority, but you want that those initial test cases, I try to make a decision, it blows up, I fail, I face consequences. You want that to happen in the protection of your home, so you can be part of that process, so you can instruct and you can correct. I think often children have been so bubble wrapped that they get out of the home, they haven't made any decisions, they haven't thought through them themselves. All those initial test cases are taking place now outside of the protective confines of parental authority. So you need to give a little bit of room for children to make some decisions, and then they deal with the natural consequence of those, and you can interact with that. Now watch the main tool here, decisions and consequences. I just said it. You begin to allow some room for that. You're the guide, you're the judge, you're the authority, but you're willing to let your child do some deciding, and you guide it. Now, I'm not saying you're going to step back if this child is choosing to do something immoral. Clearly, you're not going to do that. But in some way, you've got to begin to bear some decisions. Now, don't settle for situational solutions and behavioral control. Your goal is not to so much protect your child, regulate, control his behavior so that he never messes up. Your goal is to continue this work in his heart so that he is finally prepared for his emancipation from the home. This is not in your notes, but I want to give you 3 windows on relationship to your child. 3 types of relationships to teenagers, and you need to know what type you're in. The first one, the most healthy one, is what I would call a preventative relationship to your teenager. A preventative relationship to your teenager. That means this is a kid that's submissive, he's humble, he's listening, and because of that, he listens to your guidance, he listens to your correction, he listens to your instruction, and he doesn't get himself in trouble because that conversation is able to prevent difficulty. You get that? And so you're able to prevent a lot of that mess that happens in the life of a teenager because he's learned to submit to you, he's learned the value of your wisdom, he's participating. I mean, that's a lovely relationship with a teenager. Second style of relationship is a corrective relationship. Now, this is a child who's not quite in the good place that the preventive relationship child is, but he still responds to correction. He's messing up a little bit. He plays a little bit outside of the lines. He probably wants a little more authority than he should have. He's probably a little more independent than he should be. He doesn't recognize the temptations around him as he should. But when faced with issues, he thinks about it. He responds to your correction. So you're doing a lot of correcting, but it's producing some harvest. It's not as good as the first because you're having to deal with a mess of consequences, but you still have somebody who is responding to you and communicating to you. Here's the third one. The third one is a protective relationship. This is a teenager who's not playing, who's not listening, who doesn't respect your authority, who steps beyond the boundaries. He just blows beyond boundaries all the time, or she blows beyond boundaries all the time. Now, because you're very concerned about the disaster of lifelong consequences, you have to ask the question, what do I need to do to protect this rebellious teenager from himself so that he doesn't make decisions or involve himself in actions that alter his life for the long run? There's a further question. These are scary questions at this point because this is bad stuff. Am I able to provide those protections in the context of my home? Are we able to do that? If you're not, you may have to ask the question, does this child need to be in some place other than our home? Now look, that's why God designed the body of Christ. That's why God designed the state. The family doesn't live in isolation. We have other resources. And sometimes parents are naive. They're letting things go totally out of control. It's very clear that they don't have enough resources in their home, but they're afraid of what it will mean to ask for help. And so this child just ends up making decisions that it carries with him. I mean, how sad it is for a 17 or 8-year-old to get deeply addicted to a drug. And they now carry that addiction into 20 and 30 years old. I've sat with people who wept at just how this addiction is an everyday struggle. They're now 35. It happened at 16. And I don't think that addiction is their parents' fault, but I always think, where were their protectors? Where were the protectors? Sometimes it means making hard decisions. So you always have to be evaluating, where are we? Are we in a preventative relationship? This is not a perfect kid, but he's responding to conversations, he responds to authority, and we can prevent him going in directions he shouldn't go. Or is it a kid who's kind of messing up, but we can still talk to him and he still responds to correction? Or is it out of control, he's blowing through all the boundaries, he has no respect for authority, and we're watching him march to disaster? Don't stand there and let that happen. Get help. This child needs help. Don't give in to powerlessness. Don't give in to fatalism. Don't let his anger intimidate you into a corner. Get help. And there'll be a day when that child will thank you for those protections. I was in a counseling situation with a mom who that week had been beaten up by her son. It was mortifying for her. And it was very, very clear, she was a single mom, that she could not provide the protections this out-of-control, angry kid needed. And we found a wonderful Christian place for him to live that took all decisions out of his hands. He hated it at first. But God began to work in this kid's heart and began to see the value of living in a different way. He was protected from himself, and that anger wasn't able to go as far as it could go. I'll never forget when he was released from that place. The first time I met him, he walked in the door of my office, he threw his arms around me, and he wouldn't let go of me. And he just kept saying, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You gave my mom the courage to do this. And he said, look at me. I'm actually a nice guy. My mom's not afraid of me anymore. I have a job. And we just laughed and applauded and celebrated. He needed protection. You wouldn't let your child run out in the street. If the fence wasn't big enough, you'd move, right? Then why do we let our children march toward spiritual danger and we act like we're powerless? Don't act that way. There are parents right now, you need to get yourself help because it's out of control. Get help. Get help. Get help. Now, how do we know what we're supposed to be doing during this period of time? I want to say to you, don't give in to the cynicism of your culture. A culture would tell you there's very little good that can happen during this period of time. One writer said if you add the word teenager to any other word, the second word immediately becomes negative. Should I try? Teenage driver. Did it work? So what are you supposed to be doing? I'm very concerned that because many of us aren't goal-oriented, so we don't have goal-directed responses, we are involved in reactive parenting with teenagers. Goal-oriented responses are conceptually and morally driven. I've thought about what is right. I get what's going on with you. And because of that, I have a sense of direction. That's very different than I sort of don't have a sense of direction and I just react to whatever is the issue of the moment. That tends to be much more emotionally laden and much more emotionally driven. And reactivity as a parent generally isn't as productive as being goal-oriented. Now, in order to be goal-oriented, you have to get what a teenager is and how a teenager struggles. Because the typical struggles of a teenager will form your opportunity and your job description. Does that make sense? Because your interaction with those struggles is the way you provide preparation and protection. Now, where do we get that definition? You can't go to the Bible, to Teen 1, verse 1, and begin to read. Because your Bible, in case you didn't notice this, isn't arranged by topic. In fact, the Bible never uses the word teenager. So we might as well just pack it up and go home. Because you got no help from that book at all. Well, that's not true. Although the Bible never uses the word, the Bible has amazing things to say about this period of time we would call youth. Probably a more ancient, more expansive category than the more recent Western culture category, teenager. As I was preparing this material many years ago, I began praying, God, direct me to a place where there's your information about this period of time. And I was reading, as I regularly do, through the book of Proverbs. Proverbs encapsulates God's wisdom, and I've determined I'm going to read Proverbs till I'm wise. Luella very sweetly says, keep reading. And I was reading the first several chapters of Proverbs, and I realized that the format, the structure there, is a father giving instruction to his son. Son, heed my wisdom. Son, listen to my correction. Son, listen to my counsel. And I thought, well, that's great. There's a father talking to his son. I'm going to read this over and over again. So I started reading that. I literally read those chapters, about 8 chapters, hundreds of times, over and over again. And as I read those over and over again, something very interesting happened. Themes began to rise to the surface. You know what a theme is? A theme is something that's often repeated. You recognize a piece of music by a certain theme of its notes. I could hum some notes to you, and you would know immediately what the music was. And as I began thinking, something hit me. If a father has to repeat something over and over again to his son, what has that father identified? He's identified a struggle, right? That's why it keeps coming up. And I realized all of a sudden that in these passages, we have God's definition of the typical struggles of a teenager, the typical struggles of someone who's in his youth. And those struggles give me a definition of what's hot and happening during that period of time, and give me a definition of how I should interact with it. And so I want to look with you at the typical struggles of a teenager. 6 things that must be a goal-oriented focus for you, must form your job description. Now, here's what I love about these. Although these were written in a day when a father would say to his son, have you bedded down the camel? Animal, not cigarette. They map right onto a culture where a father would say, have you gassed up the SUV? They have this transgenerational, transcultural application to them. Although they were written thousands of years ago, if you have a teenager anywhere near you, you'll recognize these things. Now here's your heart stuff. You have to view these as opportunities. God will work very hard to stick the heart of your teenager in your face. Because he wants you to be active and he wants your teenager to be prepared. I could say it this way: the opportunity is in the trouble. If you have a toxic relationship to trouble, if you don't want any trouble whatsoever in your life, you're not going to do well with a teenager. But in that exposure of the heart and the trouble that surrounds it are wonderful opportunities to take this final step in preparing this child for his emancipation from the home. Here's the first one. Teens don't tend to hunger for wisdom and correction. I've never had one of my kids say to me, Dad, I was riding the bus home from school today and I was thinking of what a stunningly wise man you are. And I would just love to sit under the feet of your wisdom one more time tonight and have you drop a few of those gorgeous pearls down on me. Never heard that. What about correction? I've never had one of my children say, you know, Dad, I put something together the other day. One of the ways you love me the most is by correcting me. And I just want to say to you, bring on that love. Didn't hear that. Now here's the job description then. Your job is to sell to your teenager wisdom and correction, that which he is not seeking. Your job is to sell to your teenager that which he is not seeking. You don't wait for him to seek it. You sell it to him when he's not seeking it. If you're a salesman, you know the first step of sales is to create a sense of need, right? And so that's what you're doing. Now the way you do that, this is the second point, sell what they're not seeking. The way you do that is by making wisdom and correction beautiful. Now, here's the rub. Most of your wisdom and correction moments won't be on your schedule. It's 10:30 at night on a Thursday night, and one of your teenagers comes to you and says, I have a science project due tomorrow. You know that project was assigned 6 years ago. And so going where you don't want to go, you say, what do you need? Teenagers are good at these conversations. They start easy. They say, oh, I need some poster board. You got enough cardboard and duct tape in the house, you can approximate poster board. You're not too upset yet. You say, what else do you need? You say, well, I need some markers. We learned very early in our parenting to always buy water-based markers. You know why? Because when they get dry, you can cut the blunt end off, you can pour water down them, there's more ink in there. I'm a Christian, I believe in the principle of resurrection. And then you say, what else do you need? And this child mumbles very quickly, 12 baby chickens. You can't believe it. The emotional temperature immediately changes. And you say, then go upstairs and lay them. And then you go off in the glory of your wisdom. In my day, I would have never thought of coming to my parents at 10:30 at night on a Thursday night when I had a science project due on Friday. Why in my day would you even have science projects? I made up my own. I was such a good student, and I sat on those eggs myself. Now, when you're going off like that, what is your child seeing? Oh, this is going to hurt your feelings. But I got to say it, a fool. Because if you're so delusional as to confess to the complete righteousness of your youth, you need help. You know what's actually true? This is very humbling. I began to realize there were very few struggles in my teenager that I still couldn't identify in myself. I'm more like my teenagers than I'm like them. Say that to yourself. It'll help you. They're not different than me. They're like me. Sad but true. What's the issue of the science project? What's the issue? Can you give it to me in a word? Procrastination. Are you actually going to say there's no evidence of any procrastination in your life? Anybody here own a garage you can't drive into anymore? You keep saying to yourself you're going to empty it out. It never happens. You're thinking of building another garage, not for a car, but for more stuff. Anybody here do your taxes the night of? You know the post office that stays open till midnight? You've gotten to know all the other procrastinators. It's like a reunion. This year you're bringing the brownies. You see, if you say your problem isn't like your problem is that you're not like me, I can't believe you do such a thing. How do you get to? And oh, by the way, Jesus loves you. It doesn't fit, does it? But say to your child, you know, I get exactly how you got yourself in this mess because I'm like you. I tend to put the stuff that I enjoy to the top of the list and keep pushing the stuff down that I find distasteful until I've gotten myself in trouble. Now I want you to know, I'm not going to take you to the all-night chicken farm. And I'm not going to write that magic note that gets you off the hook. You're going to have to face your responsibility. But I'll stand with you as you do. And I want you to know, there is help for people like you and me. Because you know what we believe? This is really cool. You know what we believe? We don't believe that wisdom is an outline or a book. We believe that wisdom is a person, and his name is Jesus. And Jesus offers you his wisdom. That's an awesome conversation. That's making wisdom beautiful. What about correction? Do you make correction beautiful? It's 11 o'clock at night, and that son that you sent into the room at 7:30 to do his homework is still surfing YouTube, and you can't believe it. You burst in the room and say, I don't ask for much. I don't need a mansion or a Rolls Royce. Just a son who's from earth. What is it about you? Are you deaf? You can't hear me? Want me to speak louder to you? Would that help? How about I hold your hand like a 5-year-old and lead you around? Because that's how you act. What's going on in the heart of that child? He's raging against you at that moment. Because what you're doing is demeaning and ugly. It's not beautiful. And you are actually potentiating the very rebellion that you'd like to break down. The next time he hears your feet walking toward his room, is he going to be excited? Is he going to be willing? No way. Parents, you know what you want to have happen? You want to be able to say hard things to your child that inside they may chafe against, but when you turn your back and you walk down the hall, that child, that teenager, boy or girl says, I don't always like what this person says to me, but this person loves me. Is that what you're building? Do you make wisdom and correction beautiful? The dangerous thing is, Proverbs says, if you get anything, get wisdom. Proverbs says, he who hates correction is a fool. And the danger is, our teenagers don't esteem wisdom and they don't esteem correction. Our job is to make those beautiful. Are you doing that with your teenager?
Humbling, huh? Humbling. So, I don't think this is just about teenagers, some of his points. It really is about understanding that click that. Okay. I forgot. You can use a mouse. Yeah. Yeah, got the mouse. It's funny because I was having a conversation with my son today. And Sue and I have been working with him about trying to work hard in school. Because there are, just like most kids, there are things that he doesn't enjoy. He doesn't enjoy basically anything that is hard, which is almost everything, right? But he enjoys Clash of Clans, and he enjoys playing soccer and hanging out with his friends. And so I was having a conversation with him today, and I said, Jack, I said, there are a lot of things in life that are going to be difficult, and you have to be willing to do those no matter what. And if you don't, you're going to end up in the gutter. Lying in the gutter. And I was trying to, I said it in a kind, nice way. I wasn't, you know what? The Paul Tripp way. He looks angry, doesn't he? I would be scared if I was his son and he was like that in front of me. Oh, what? I don't do much for you, but this is all I ask. But I said it nicely, but I still said the same thing, the same essence. And I realized as I was watching this thinking, boy, even towards my own 9-year-old son, I still have that mentality of wanting results without really thinking about the future. What is his life going to be? So this isn't just for teens. I think in general, as you know, it's something that we've been talking about a lot, which is how are you thinking through what you're saying so that it's not simply about affecting behavioral change, but it really is about impacting their hearts. Right, I just want to share that there's something that happened today. I need to go back and have a subsequent conversation with my son, talk a little bit more deeply about things. But first and foremost, anything that strikes you, anything that just jumps out at you as something that he said, or maybe just like for me, that came to me when I was thinking about my own kids. And again, it doesn't have to be just about the teenagers, but really it's about all children. Anything that come up?
It's good to hear that you can also tell your kids, I make mistakes too.
Mm-hmm.
That we both could try to, what's the word? Try to journey along, or what's the better phrase?
Sure.
Try to arrive at that point.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Where you
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
correction as good, as God
Yeah.
intended.
And that has definitely been, last week we talked a lot about that, and I feel as though we've been talking about that much, which is that if you're not regularly connecting with your children about your own challenges, it's very hard for them to look at you as someone who is real, because they only see us with such a high view. It's very difficult for them to see us as, quote, real people. And so part of that is empathy is a huge aspect of it. Versus, when I was your age, I walked really long roads and suffered so much to get to where I am, and I only had 1 grain of rice to live on, and okay, I heard that from my dad. But we tend to pass that along, without realizing it, that mentality, and so our kids don't understand. So yeah, that's you really experienced that, Anne, in wanting to give that.
I'm learning more with Nicole now. I know I haven't done that with my older 3. Learning more with her.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Anything that struck you?
What was important was that the end goal of the conversation is how to talk about Jesus and the gospel in it.
Yeah.
Because if that's not your end goal, then he was saying it's really hard to get to that if you're yelling and being self-righteous and
Yes.
all that. And
Yeah.
so I think, I remember to keep Jesus as the end goal of the conversation. I think my conversations leading up to it being very different.
Right. What is the end goal usually of our?
To affect behavior.
Yeah.
To whatever it is.
Yeah.
Rather than the heart.
Something that he said, he talked about being reactive versus goal-oriented, right? Don't you think that that's, in some respect, how we tend to respond? In general, we react to circumstances. Again, this is stuff that we've been talking about for quite a while, right? And this has definitely transcended age. It's not just about teenagers. This is 0 to 3. This is 6 to 12. Being reactive versus goal-oriented. And if our goal is Christ, and we work backwards from there, you would definitely see a different pattern to the way that we respond to those circumstances. So, yeah. Any other thoughts?
He was also talking about selling the wisdom and correction.
Yeah.
And I would so have to agree with that, because at this age, they don't just you can't demand things on them anymore.
Right.
So the most challenging thing for me is, I wasn't thinking really selling, but I guess that's what it is, is I have to, the work is trying to inspire them so that if I just tell them, it's just going to be, I notice it just doesn't do much. So it takes so much more work on my part to try to sell or, inspire them so that they would do this on their own, thinking that it was, so yeah, that I think that's just so important, with not only just with, the wisdom and the correction part, but just doing like school work or anything, why have goals? Rather than just trying to say, well, this is going to get you this and this and this, which doesn't do very much.
Yes. How do you sell it? How do you make something beautiful for somebody else? Is it even possible? Especially something that at face value doesn't look beautiful at all. Correction? Who thinks that's beautiful?
Well, you do have to kind of make the end goal of, after you've gone through, this is the beautiful result that you're going to get. You have to somehow present that.
Yes, you have to present it, but
Yeah.
how do you?
Isn't that the hard part? Because in order to sell something to someone, you have to give them tangible benefits.
You have to give tangible benefits, such as. Can you give me an example?
That's part of the reason why we drive our kids, isn't it? To give them something that they can have so that they'll do something.
Yeah. Tina, welcome. We are asking the question of how do we make that which our kids don't find beautiful. So one of the examples, and it's from Proverbs, really, wisdom and correction. How do you make that something they actually want versus something that we're imposing on them? And tangible benefits. So how do you make something such as correction have a tangible benefit to a teenager that actually it's something that they want from you? And maybe the better way to look at it is how he ended that last. Do you remember what he said? What was the very last thing he said? Anyone recall? What was the very last thing he said? this is a true test. It's like a, car accident. See what you observe. Anyone remember what was the last thing he said?
I don't know if it was the last thing he said, but he basically said that he's the same way and that they can work towards that solution together. The solution was Jesus.
Yeah. And that's right. That's what it was. It was the idea that you have to recognize that Jesus really is the ultimate picture of it. And you know what? I had the last thing, and I literally forgot it as I was talking to you. This is how fleeting the mind is. Yeah. Oh man. I literally lost my thought as I was, and that's one of the challenges for being asleep. Anyway, it's gone. It's gone far away. I forgot when we were. The context of what we were talking about was
To make it beautiful.
Yeah. Anyway, just forget that.
Technical benefits. How do we make correction beautiful?
Yeah. How do we make correction beautiful? And the fact is that if we are not regularly looking to intentionally consider what we do and why we do what we do, it becomes very difficult to really. I'll forget it. I'm just gonna rewind this. I'm trying to figure out what I'm saying, and as I'm speaking, and I'm thinking, wait a second, I have no idea what I'm saying. Now I'm sounding dumb. There was something that he said at the last, and I had it, and I totally forgot. But it is so. It was a pretty important part. So I'm just gonna rewind this very quickly. Thankfully, DVDs you don't have to rewind tape. Sorry, everyone. I literally forgot what I was. Okay, as this is rewinding. Going back, first of all, anyone else have anything that came to mind or anything that struck you?
I think what struck me was how difficult it is to practice it, even though you may be somewhat familiar with the concepts in the heat of the moment, without a regular considering of what am I trying to achieve?
Right.
How do I want to deal with this situation? Because if I'm thrust in it suddenly at 10:30 at night, what I realize about myself is that everything we're talking about now is going to go to the wayside.
Yeah.
Passions will flow, and I do exactly that. What is wrong with you? I told you so many times.
Yeah.
Why can't you get it? Why don't you just shut your mouth and listen?
Yeah.
And I'm quoting verbatim there. So that's a hard thing.
Yeah.
Even though there's some familiarity with the concepts, it gets lost at that moment.
Does it always get lost, or just not always, right?
Not
Once in a
always.
while.
Yes, once in a while.
What was wrong? Why are you?
Yes.
Once in a while. It's not always, but
Yes.
I would say that the more outrageous the child's response, or unexpected or rebellious,
Right.
the harshness rises in measure.
Yeah. Something he said in earlier videos, he said, he gave examples like that, and with his teenage son. And one of the things that he had to do was because his son lied to him very bluntly about where he was staying overnight. And this is a son who had never done anything wrong, right? And
Must form,
who had,
because if you're so delusional,
this son had never done anything wrong. He had been a good boy, always listening, but one day just absolutely lied about where he was, and he got his friend to lie for him and spent his night somewhere else. When he finally came home, he, in his heart, he wanted to be like, where were you? I know what you did. You're a liar. And, I mean, basically call him on it. But instead, he waited, he prayed through it, and he really held back and went through a lot of different question answer. But I think the point of it is that sometimes you fail, sometimes you succeed. And that's obvious, right? But those failures can be even opportunities, even your own failures. To recognize that there are opportunities to say, I'm sorry, I failed you. That please forgive me. Doesn't necessarily mean that, well, it allows for that child to get away with what they did, but it's to recognize that there's something also to be taught even in your own failure, and that child can learn something about Christ through that reality. And that's a good means. One thing that he's really emphasized throughout has been utilize these as opportunities. They're always opportunities. And when we fail to see it that way, we're going to really struggle. We're going to miss these opportunities. But God has a real way upon using these things. Oh, all right.
Teenagers don't esteem wisdom, and they don't esteem correction. Our job is to make those beautiful. Are you doing that with your teenager?
I don't know what it was. I think one thing that, actually, there is something he said at that last meeting is that we don't always realize that our teenagers or our children, they're naturally inclined to turn away from the Lord, as well as to not see what we see. I mean, isn't that one of the most frustrating things, is that our parents, when they were parenting us, they would always try to give us perspective, and we just couldn't see it. And our children have the same challenge, is that we try to give them this perspective. They cannot see that the wisdom that we're trying to make beautiful is not so beautiful to them. So the real challenge for us is, how do you make that which they do not see beautiful truly beautiful? And Julia, to get back to what you had said, is that partly, incentives and being able to show them consequence and what can happen. That's a part of it, but is that enough? What do you think?
Is that enough? No, it's not.
So what else is there?
And I think at the end of the day, it's like, yes, us as parents have, so much responsibility over our kids, but at the end of the day, the kids are going to learn through the mistakes. There's going to be other things that God's planted in their lives for them to learn through these opportunities, and I don't think the onus is all on us.
Mm-hmm.
We're part of the process, but I just feel like kids are going to have to learn through all kinds of things in order to see that those things are beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think there is something to that, which is that, that which is beautiful a lot of times is found through ashes. That's the cross, right? In other words, difficulty is a huge road to beauty. And anything that is worthwhile is always going to take either hard work, trial, and you won't really be able to experience that until you're able to see it. And I would say, tell me how many of you, maybe, have you personally had some challenges with your children? And obviously this is, especially for those of you who have older children, right? So for those of us who are parenting teens, where they've really gone through inner turmoil and have come through that experiencing God's grace. Do you feel like you've seen that? Mm-hmm. Yeah? What about both of you? Do you feel like you've seen that?
Yes.
Tina, have you seen that?
It's funny, I think I've seen that with my middle one. Not my oldest one as much.
Well, that's,
Yeah.
and that could be the case. You're right. It could be with a younger child. Have you seen that? Yeah. Like where you see real brokenness. The sense of, I'm so sorry. And it's not just, I'm sorry I did something wrong. You know, that I got caught doing something wrong. But it's almost like I did this before the Lord. And this, it's not just that I disappointed you. It's not just that I disappointed myself, but I really disappointed God. And I see that I'm a sinner and I need a Savior. Have you seen that?
I'm not quite sure. Maybe with it might not, but I'm not definite.
Okay. So for those of you who had, what is that? How has that made you feel? And what do you feel you did? Not that we did anything. A lot of times it's despite us. But is there anything that you learned through that experience that you would say, I saw how God used us in this process? Maybe if you could share that. For those, because you said you did experience that. And you both said you did experience that. And you said you experienced that. And you said you experienced that. So
I think maybe it goes along with what you said about how to, what the concept of how do you make it beautiful and what do you present. And I think if there's anything that's been done, and I saw this particular struggle that I'm thinking about with my one of my sons, is that that they when it happened, I knew about it, but I didn't say or do anything about it. I watched how this was going to progress, and I was praying, but I didn't really address it directly.
Mm-hmm.
When they finally came to me and said that he particularly had heard the Lord speak to him about that particular sin that he needed to deal with, and he was struggling with, and then he came through. I think what when he had that conversation with me at the end, I realized is what he valued, or that correction, or that call out, especially from the Lord. It wasn't condemnation, but what he valued was what he saw us value.
Mm-hmm.
That the struggle that we go through, God is with us, and he there is no condemnation, but he takes us through these times so that you could, come to God. And so he was talking about the exact same things that I would have felt if I had gone through something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is anything that's, done, it's just the continual teaching about, or things that we've talked about in the past about how to deal with struggle and what happens when struggling happens, what you do with sin.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to tie in with what you said about how do you make it beautiful. I don't know about how to make it beautiful, but I think our children do value what we value, or if whatever we see, is beautiful or good, they value and see that as good too.
Mm-hmm.
So they strive for it whether they like it or not. So
yeah, I would say that's the case, Ellen, if they are in what he talked about, the three relationships: preventative, corrective, and protective. I would say that's the preventative relationship.
I was thinking that this particular incident was the child that has sort of the corrective, where he, there is a lot of, a little bit of mistakes and rebellion going on, and then goes through this. Type of thing, so.
Probably most of us have children who are in the corrective, which is they respond to correction, but they generally stay in the lines, but every once in a while they're jumping out of the line. They're following, but then they fall off. Some of you might have preventative, which is that this child is submissive, humble, listens to guidance and instruction. How many of you have any children like that? They're regularly, they generally don't ever fall off. They're always on. They're always in a place of listening and growing and humble and teachable. Anyone have that child? No?
Well, I wasn't going to say always, but mostly, and I don't know. This is what is. We talked about this before. Could be a danger area. I have one who is very open to correction. I could say it and he could respond back and we
Uh-huh.
could have a, really real good conversation about
Yeah.
it and okay, that, but I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take this as if this was truly healthy. In other words, not someone who's hiding, who's secretive, but someone who really does respond well to correction on a regular basis and is very receptive to it, very open to it. Anyone have that, child?
I think generally, I do feel like Arden's a very good child. He's a rule follower and he doesn't like to look bad. And so he generally follows rules for that reason. But also with that, I feel like there's a temptation to feel like he's not a sinner
Mm-hmm.
and that he doesn't fail.
Yeah.
And I feel like lately I've gotten a lot of opportunities to show him otherwise, that he's not so good and so perfect.
Yeah.
And that's part of the building blocks, I feel like. Those building opportunities where, like last time I shared about how, he had kicked his sister and I was about to bring out the stick and his sister had saved him from, getting the stick. And, just yesterday, I heard him hit her and I was like, Arden, you know what I said about that. And he just broke down bawling. He's just like, no, please don't. He knew what was coming because, it just, this uncontrollable fear and tears came out. But I feel like those are just building blocks that continue to teach him that he sins, he fails as well, not just mommy and daddy. And you know what I mean? I feel like it's a false idea for me to think that he's so good because, he fails and, there's plenty of opportunities that have shown me that.
That example is a good one because let me tell you how I would imagine, and I've seen it in my own children, is that not just at Arden's age when they were that age, but even throughout, is that there's a distinctive difference between someone who receives correction because they truly see the depth of their sin and how they have failed, not me, or they're not worried about the consequence. They're not even worried about the consequence. What they are is truly affected by the depth of their sin and how it's rebelling ultimately against God. Versus the fear of failing you, parent, or afraid of the consequence of the action because there's pain behind it. You know what I mean? I think most of us, and that's a good thing, by the way. I think it is a good thing and that's something that we talked about on the earlier stages. You need to teach your children that, in the earlier stages, that there's a consequence to their action, and even a painful one, because that pain connector shows you that, well, if I do something wrong, there's going to be something bad that happens in my life. If I turn against God. But eventually, in the teen years, what happens is that no longer is that there's a physical pain. The hope is that that's so embedded in their heart that eventually they recognize that, there's a consequence to my action if I do something morally wrong. But it's not going to be a spanking. It's going to be something else. So there is something to be taught there. But that in and of itself doesn't make it beautiful. You know what I mean? Later on, you don't want that child now who's 15 years old to only be reacting to the fear of the consequence. And that's all they get. That's why they don't do what they do. Because in the end, that's not enough to change their heart, to want them to follow God or to live out their life in a gracious, humble, responsible, godly way. It's only going to be a life of fear then at that point. Don't you think? I mean, Dan, when you were talking about what you were talking about earlier, as you're weighing and you're thinking through parenting, because I know that with my own children, is that I'm always trying to discern, how do I get my child not just to fear the consequence, but to actually want to follow God, to actually, when they do turn away, that what I'm mourning over is my sin, not that I'm going to be punished.
I think in general, my view of correcting and instructing children is that generally the children respond better when we respond to their action with grace and love in general. So if we respond to their action with anger and frustration,
Yes.
even though they may know
Yes.
they may know they have made mistake. It's
Yes.
more out of anger towards us. Our behavior makes them angry, so they only focus on our behavior instead of their own the initial mistake. So they would only focus on that. Whereas if we have more patience and just listen to them and just guide them with patience, then eventually they will come around and they will come to repentance. That's my observation.
Yeah. So you've seen that happen?
Yes.
Yeah. Where they actually own up
Right.
to what they've done
Right.
in a much more, I don't know.
They're more broken.
Yeah, more
Whereas
broken.
when we react to their
Yes.
mistake with frustration and
Yeah.
all this wrath,
Yes.
so forth, then they only focus on our
Yeah.
action and
Yeah.
they just kind of turn.
Yeah.
That's true. So I know that I failed in correcting when afterwards the response is, "This is why I don't want to get married." If I hear that from my girls, I know then that I failed. And I've heard that before. And but there was a recent incident actually after gleanings. We asked the girls, "What you learn about yourself?" And what one of them shared was this mourning over sin, not about any consequences, but just sharing that I realized how selfish I was while we were playing water polo. I snuck out because I didn't want to wait in line for the shower. It was so bad. So no one said, "How selfish, how could you do that?" It was just sharing, I think, that the Spirit had brought upon her heart that she's a sinner. And so I think that was an opportunity just to remind her, we are all sinners. And that the revealing of that sin is a measure of God's grace, but at the same time, because of the gospel, we can't remain there. We don't have to remain there because that's when God pours out His grace. So I think that was another example where we didn't do anything.
Yeah.
It wasn't really our parenting, but God's Spirit at work in her, and we were just able to share that.
Right. Yeah. I shared this earlier, but before Sue and I went on a vacation, we were having this challenge with Carissa, and I think just like a lot of your kids, you generally have pretty good kids overall. I was with a lot of them, for 1 week, and I was expecting a little bit more challenge, and there were some here or there, but generally speaking, even the guys, that sounds funny. They were generally good kids, really, really good kids. But good doesn't get you to love the Lord. That's not good enough. No matter how good you are, you'll never be good enough. And my daughter happens to be one of them. She's a really good daughter. She, generally speaking, listens well. But, we caught her doing something that we were incredibly disappointed by. And we've caught her, this is like the third time. And the challenge has been for us is, how do we deal with regular, repeated sins? And Sue and I talked a lot about it. We said happened to be in the garage at the time, and said, "Chris, go upstairs. Mommy and I are gonna have a talk." And so we talked, and Sue and I were together. We were battling each other, as to like the approach. But both of us were so deeply disappointed, but we respond very differently. We're two very different people. And it wasn't after till we got together and really hashed it out between the two of us that we finally had our conversation with her and brought her downstairs. We just shared with her listened to her, and I have never seen her more broken, not just in terms of being caught, but really before the Lord of what it was. One of my proudest moments of her, even though it was in the midst of one of the darkest moments for her. And she just broke down in tears before the Lord and said, I disappointed God. I mean, I sinned against the Lord, and and I don't want to be this way. And wanting to really want change in her heart. It was tremendous, actually. But it took a lot of listening, holding back our real anger, actually. And I'm not saying, there have been times we failed. I've failed, and I've shared a lot of that, especially with my youngest one. That seems to happen more regularly. But it's I think seeing the sin, when you're able to step back and realize that you're just as much of a sinner as that person that you're talking to, that's when you slowly start seeing God's amazing grace. But yeah, Dan, absolutely. I mean, Tracy, like you said, I totally agree. Once you start taking the higher ground and where self-righteousness comes into play, which I know I'm just as guilty of with my own children and everybody else, that's when usually the battle is lost, and we lose our children's hearts that way, especially teenagers. They know. They really are good at sort of pushing back the junk that we throw at them. Because at that point, they can do that in a sense. Like as a child, children from 0 to 12, they don't really understand a lot of times what's going on with us. But once they hit the teen years, what's happening is that they're pushing the limits with you because they now see you a little bit more as you are. And you can't get away with the things that you used to. Like the double standards that you used to be able to get away with. Because generally, those little kids, yeah, they see it, they understand it, but they can't fully process it. Now they're processing it fully, and it's really difficult to get away with that. So now we really have to live out what we've done. I mean, don't you think that's the case? For those of you who are parenting teens?
We work so hard to make sure that our kids do all kinds of smart things academically, and then they backfire later because they've gotten too smart.
Yeah, you're too smart for your own good.
So, in teenagers, not only do they see it, but they can articulate it. Like you said, they can throw it back at you, but their logic is better when you're talking to them. And so you can't, do this, and because especially if you're coming from an emotional, state of mind, they my kids can say, well, you're saying this because of da-da-da-da-da, which is absolutely true. Then I feel like I've totally lost this argument right now. I got to go through, okay, so we got to take a time out.
Yeah.
I got to go and regroup with myself, myself and I re-strategize, and then come back with it. Because they're like adults.
Yeah.
They're like us.
We're prepping them for that place.
Yeah, we are.
And that's something that he kept on stressing. Remember, he was saying that we're preparing them to leave. I mean, essentially, we're preparing them to be that independent person. And they're supposed to be thinking about these things. So, sort of have to be careful in what we're teaching, what we're doing.
So going back to what you're saying, how you want your kids to not just take the correction, but to be really, like you said, broken and really feel, notice their sin and that they've done wrong in front of God. But it almost, in that sense, in order to be there, I have to kind of assume that the child is, saved. We kind of talked about, I think last week, how, a lot of times we don't know. A lot of times it's, it's not in our hands.
Yes.
And so, if our kids haven't been saved at that point, then I almost kind of feel like I can't. It has to be God's work.
Yeah. Yes. No, I mean, that's a great point, and you're absolutely right. It is God's work. 2 is, there is an assumption that this person does know the Lord genuinely. But I also believe this is that for my other children, sometimes I'm not sure. If I don't know whether a child knows the Lord or not, and when I say I don't know, I really mean if there's any doubt at all, I always err on the side that they don't know the Lord. I assume they don't know the Lord. I don't want to assume that they know Christ. Then I still think there's a lot of the principles of what we're talking about I can apply. Because here's the thing about all people. All people, from a biblical worldview, is that we're all created in God's image. Therefore, there's something in every person that longs for God. The reality, though, is that people look for anything other than God to put into their hearts to fill that longing. And that's where everything, including our own children. So let's assume that in a biblical anthropology that this person, this little person, has a desire for God. But they, because of sin, do not pursue God at all. They pursue something to put into their heart other than God. So they have this need and this longing to fulfill it. And part of that is filling it with themselves, with they're their own king. So your hope is to be able to bring that child to a place where they recognize that, that need is not going to be met ever by what you are trying to fill it for yourself. And in fact, by doing that, you're only causing problems for yourself. And once in a while, we would watch. We did this home video of Jack when he was really young, and we brought him to Disneyland, and he was absolutely selfish during that time. He was like going nuts, and we took this video, and every once in a while, we show it to him today, and we're like, and he laughs at it, and we're like, Jack, that's what you were like, but that's what you're sort of like today too. That desire of wanting to your own way, and when you don't get it, you throw a tantrum. And that's what a child is like, and they need that. They see the foolishness of it now, and the hope is that they recognize, well, I need a savior. I need something other than this. This isn't the way. I was talking to Tina. I was talking to Axis, and I was laughing, and I was giving an example of how I said, there were these 3 boys once that came over to my house, and they were throwing these rocks at these windows. But the story is that Jack and Sam and this one other kid, they threw rocks at our neighbor's window and broke his window. It's a true story. And happened to break. It was a very expensive window, like $2,700.
The cube kind.
It was like a whole set, and it was custom made. And I made Jack go, to our neighbor and say, I'm sorry, I broke your window, and please tell me how much it costs. I'll pay for it. So when Sua came back with him, I thought, oh, okay, we're gonna end up. Wow, stinks. We're gonna end up paying like $200. Because man, those windows are expensive. And I said, how much is a window? And I said, is it like $200? And she said, I said, 500? 1,000? 2,700 for this one window. Anyway, long story short, I was talking about it with Sam, and he's laughing about it, and so is Jack, and because you can look back and see, and they say, yeah, that was stupid. We're still paying for it today. I'm still sweeping the floor in my house. Sam is, and, for Jack, I took all of his money off that house. I'm taking it. You're paying me back for the rest of your life. But when they see the foolishness of their life, the hope is that those little events, and once they slowly start getting, oh boy, I've been so foolish. The hope is that they see it in the context of before God. So Eileen, that's what I would say is that, yeah, I know that we might not be able to do it to a child who doesn't maybe know the Lord, but you're building the ability to see what sin looks like, how dark it is, how empty it is, how much they're pursuing all these things to give them the desire of what they really want, and the hope is to point them to Christ. The teen years are a great time to do that, and it's an exciting time. I really do believe that, but being able to point them in every way to see that reality. But we can't give up on that. And that's something that he had talked about. Remember how he was saying, do not let the culture make you cynical towards teenagers. You don't know how many people say to me, oh, you have 3 daughters and 1 son. Sons are really hard in the beginning, but they're really much easier in the teen years. But wait, I know you have it really easy, when they're kids, because you have 3 daughters, but wait till they're teenagers. They're much more difficult. So I've been told that a lot, by a lot. You've heard that, right? Some of you might have even said that to me. But I haven't thus far found that to be true. I think the reason why people say that is because they're cynical about those teen years. Well, they've already assumed, well, oh, teenager means rebellion. Teenager means hardship. Teenager means teen pregnancy, drug abuse, partying all the time. But what happened in those early years led to those years, don't you think? Any other thoughts?
So I have 2 very different boys, very, very different boys. And as they get older, it's just getting more and more apparent to me how different they are and how difficult it is to raise them. And so I really wanted to make it, even though I'm like super late, I just, I feel like I need help, With one of them, I constantly have struggles with him. He's always veering off, so I'm constantly bringing him back in. And then with my older one, you guys, I'm pretty obvious, but he is very straight and narrow. And the thing is, I feel like I'm like with Sam, I've had so many opportunities to bring him back in, and show him. Of course, there's been anger and all that, but there have been good moments too where we had really, really great talks, and he would pour out, everything, and really come to the Lord. I feel like he really came to the Lord at those moments. But with Alex, he just doesn't do anything to make me so angry. He doesn't. And I'm worried about him too, because he's not showing me his sin, or is that he sees his sin. And I don't see his sin as much too, so it's hard for me to you have to make an effort with him to actually get into his mind and see what's going on. And he's kind of more quiet, and works hard, and he stays on course. But I don't know where he is as much. Like with Sam, I kind of know, because we constantly, Sam takes like 90% of my parenting. So I feel like I really I have that closeness. So my question is, with Alex, I want to know how to get into, when he doesn't show me his sin, and I don't know if he sees it.
Yeah. Last week we spent a lot of time talking about this, and this is from the 6 to 12-year-old range, and it's a real benefit. But I think it actually benefits someone like Alex. And I spent a week with Alex.
Yeah, you should
spending
tell me what
25 hours a day. No, actually, it's not that. I think it's one of the things that Paul Tripp was talking about is that observing your child, especially in the way in which they interact with others, is such a critical part of understanding the heart of that child. And one thing that parents do not do enough is we do not really sit there and ask questions. Like, for example, so Tina, this is an answer for you, but it's an answer for others who have generally a compliant child, right? The questions that need to be asked is, do you ask other people what they think about your child? Things that they observe. Because the fact of the matter is that we are very blind to our own children's goodnesses and flaws. And sometimes we just don't want to hear it. So one of the things that he was really saying is that a lot of times parents are the last ones to know about what our children are really like. But other kids know. And so going up to someone you trust to some extent and saying, you've had my kids over, what do you think about them? What are some of the struggles that they had? Did you notice any sins? Did you notice anything that they were doing that was off? Or what are some of the blessings that they brought? And really sort of interviewing that person and getting an idea, okay, and maybe doing it to a few people and seeing what they're like. Because I could say a few things about Alex from our time together, and I saw some great qualities. I saw some areas of growth. And the reality is that if you get down to it, a lot of times our kids are not going to show everything to us, right? It just isn't going to happen. So that's one thing, to really be focused on observing. But there are a lot of things we can observe. Like, are they quieter? Something that we've noticed with Elizabeth, our third daughter, is that she's really quiet. I mean, she's very happy-go-lucky, but I've brought her to a lot of different contexts, and she is absolutely will say nothing. I mean, I'm the coach of our soccer team. And usually when your dad's the coach, there's a lot more opportunity to connect with other girls. She doesn't say anything to anyone else except for me. And I've been doing this for 2 years. Now I'm thinking, what is going wrong here? So I've had to start asking questions. What's going on? And she's slowly started to tell me. But that's out of an observation, not just from what I noticed, but my other daughters noticed that about her. And they kept on emphasizing it and almost making fun of her a little bit. Hey, you never say anything. What's wrong with you? So then we started having conversations about that. Now we're regularly keying in on that. So that's something that, I would say is that what you do is you look for patterns of behavior, and you start asking, what's going on there? Why are you saying these things regularly? And if you don't see it, ask other people. Ask people who are, other people who you're connected to. That might help. I think that actually will help a lot to know. But that's for all of us as parents. You should be doing that regularly. Whatever personality you see, don't assume that that's only a strength.
I think they're flip sides of the same coin. The sin is all there. I know it's there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how it comes out.
Yeah.
And it's how they see it in themselves.
Yes.
And I really, some people see their sin so clearly, and some people just don't even notice.
Yeah.
They don't even know their sin. They
Even though
think
everybody
they're
else
so good.
does. Yeah.
And I feel like that's dangerous to be,
Yeah.
To me it's more dangerous to not even see it.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
how is he going to know the Lord then?
Yeah.
If he doesn't see his
Yes.
sin and his
Yes.
need for him.
Yep. No, absolutely. Another way, though, is going back to what we were talking about with Dan, is that if you regularly are able to confess your own sin to that child, if you do sin against that child, and let's say someone like Alex, someone who's good generally, but it could be, I'm not praying for you enough. I don't spend enough time talking to you about the Lord, about who he is, why he's so good, why he's worth following. It's not a sin, but it could be something that you could say, this is an area of weakness. I want to grow with you in. I want to communicate. I find this, today I was driving, I drove 2 of my kids. And I don't know what you all are like when you drive your kids, but when I drive with my kids, I don't really want to talk to them when it's one-on-one. Really, like I would rather turn on the radio and listen to the news. And funny thing is, that's exactly what my dad did with me. Whenever I would drive in his car, he would, as soon as I get in the car, he'd turn on the news and he would say nothing. And I said, and I remember sitting there and I hated it. It was so awkward to be sitting in my car with my dad, going on he'd be driving me to school, and I'd say nothing to him, and he'd be listening to the news. And now today, I want to turn on the news. I totally understand why he did it now. You're just tired. It's more interesting to hear what's going on in Syria or Iraq than to ask these questions with my son. Well, because I always have to think of something. Well, he's not asking me anything, right? He's not saying, "Hey, Dad, how's your day?" And so I have to think of questions. But I have to, right? What are you all like with? Do you ever drive with your own child and do you just want to turn on the news? Am I the only one who does that? Once at least. I don't do it all the time. So in the middle of it, I'm like, okay, I turn it off and I say, I start asking some questions. But then I run out of things. Am I the only one who struggles with this?
No, I feel like from the moment I open my eyes, like my kids are both at me, like asking me questions, asking me to do this and that. So yeah, I do feel like when I get to the car, sometimes I just want to turn the music on and just zone out for the time that I get to the next destination, where I get bombarded again by requests and things.
I wonder if that's a mom thing. Bombardment with requests. Do you get bombarded with, like when you drive with your kids alone, do you have long conversations with them?
No, I mean, not that I recall, no.
Yeah. I mean, with Carissa I do, and with Sarah, but actually my two youngest I have a hard time talking to them when I'm alone. I don't know if it's just age. Do you both, Gabriel? Do you talk to your sons?
I try to.
When you're
every
alone in
time-
the car or something?
Yeah, every time I go in the car with them, but usually I have a problem with Isaac because I don't know what he's talking about.
So this is what he said, our kid's voice, the biggest complaint about riding with dad in the car, says, dad's gonna ask the same question again. So,
Yeah.
how's your life? And the boys don't wanna answer, how's my life? So that's how we start the conversation. And then they say, it's fine, great, or whatever, and
And then
then
it ends.
the public radio comes
Yes.
on.
But I improved, so I try to get the topics that he's interested in.
Sure.
So I asked him about Transformers, things like that, but he really get into deep, then I get lost. The bad thing is he knows that I'm lost.
Yeah, so he always says, dad always says the obligatory, right?
Yeah.
It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard.
I think it's nice that you try,
Yeah, I'm trying, but I have to read the book that he reads in order to understand.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm
Otherwise,
better at pretending to know what they're talking about, but
I think
Absolutely.
sons and daughters too, they find it easier to talk to mom, generally. I think that's a generalization, but I think there is something to that.
I think he's very good with the girls. He talks all the time, especially in the car. He finds it like a opportunity to teach and instruct. So I think he talks to them more than I do to them. Yeah.
In the car.
In the car. Or even at home too. I think generally he's more.
I feel like the car is a unique place.
Yeah.
It's you're sort of stuck in this small little box, right? And you have to talk, or else it seems weird, or you turn on the radio, right?
I think it's hard also when there's three of them there. It's hard to really get deep into conversation with one of them when there are always three of them there.
Mm-hmm.
But even with one, too, it's hard to.
Yeah, well, when it's one, like I've driven Alex home a number
He's
of times.
quiet, right?
But I have to do what Gabriel just said, which is I start thinking of things that I think that they're going to be interested in, so I'll ask and say how's school, and they'll tell, of course, it's always the same old questions, right? So I do think that sometimes I'm scared that they're going to think, okay, he has his set questions. It's like a telemarketer. I have a script. You answer this, I give this answer that leads to this, and but it definitely flows better for me with my older daughters than with my younger ones. I don't know what to talk about at a certain point.
I feel the same because we kind of put our kids down. Like if she puts down Ira, I'll put down Stella, and I every time she puts down Ira, I always hear them laughing and talking, and I'm just like, man, every time I put him down, it's like, how's your day? Fine. He doesn't want to talk anymore. So I have to try to talk to him about his toys and things like that, but that doesn't last very long either. So, and I feel like with Stella, she's always trying to talk to me. Like when I put her down, she's asking me questions and talking to me. She's like, Daddy. I'm like, hey, good night, Daddy. And then she keeps talking to me. So I don't know. I find it harder. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it's just because he's a boy and I don't know.
Don't give up.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that, especially for fathers, we really, really, really cannot relinquish that because it's hard. And also because sometimes we become self-centered. Honestly, it's laziness. We want to do what we want to do. We just rather tune them out because it's a little bit easier. But if you do that at the younger ages, you will do that in the teen years, when they're 20, when they're 30, when they're 50. And you don't want to set that pattern. So it's a battle, I think, for us, but it is such a key component to parenting, is that regular communication. And there are a few things that I think he talked about that I want to just really talk about. One is this idea of preparing your child to leave the home. And that's something that especially as you're parenting teens, you have to remember. Your home today is a safe place for them to fail. And part of that is, as he talked about, giving them more opportunities of making decisions in their life. giving them opportunities to be responsible for things, and not always doing everything for them, and also providing a place for failure. Because your home is still okay. It's okay if they mess up. And it's something that we had talked about from the earliest of stages, is that you're always thinking, one day I'm not going to be over their life anymore like this. And so therefore, this is the only window I have to provide instruction, guidance, while they're still protected. So you have to be in a place where you're releasing more as they're getting older. Do you find that that's happening for you, especially for those of you who are older? Are you releasing more of the decisions to them? Mm-hmm. I know both of you, like for both of you, you have the oldest child here. I mean, both of you do. Part, I think, making their own money, that's a part of it. Well, there are things that maybe kids do, such as driving, or, but it could be other things, like choosing how they're going to study, what they're going to study. Is that something that you've seen?
How they spend their time.
How they spend their time, how they spend their money.
Yeah.
Right?
It's really crazy. I just met, it was my sister's 40, so we were out, but I met one of her friends who was 44. Mm-hmm. And then the conversation basically was, he had just come out of school once again. And he basically said that he went to school for business, and then he went to graduate school for something else, and then he went to medical school. And it was because his dad always gave him the choice of either you work or you go to school. And so he didn't want to work, so he kept going to school, and he kept going back to school. And I just felt like, gosh, he's 44, and he cannot. First of all, he obviously didn't know the importance of hard work, so he didn't want to work. Going to school was kind of the cop out, actually. And then he was still at 44 under his dad's rule of what he was supposed to do with his life. And I just thought, gosh, I hope that's that's a scary thing to be at 44 tragic. And to be in that state.
As a man, it's sad, but I totally could see how that could happen. I mean, and it didn't happen at 44. It happened when he was probably 4, and it's been going on nonstop. There is something to the idea that you're preparing your child for the day they're no longer going to be with you, and everything we're doing is leading to that end. We're not teaching and parenting for the moment. We're parenting so that one day, by God's grace, they would be in the world and a means of His grace to the world. And that would be with a family, leading a family, or being a part of a family, and being a part of the world, and making a difference for Christ, ultimately. So what you're doing today, even whether you're parenting at 0 to an 18-year-old, it really is prepping them for that place. And if you're not thinking along those terms, we're going to miss out on a huge opportunity. But you're in a place where they can fail, and it's okay. I think that's something that we must not forget, is that do not be overwrought with when they really mess up. Because if you do, you'll miss that opportunity. Because that is an opportunity to get them ready for the time that they're gone. Right? I mean, do you ever see animals like little cubs? A lot of bear cubs or lion cubs. If you watch those animal shows, it's really interesting because, and this is how God created even animals, is that a lot of what the mother bear or the polar bear mother, what they do is they sort of train that little cub to do certain things, and sometimes it seems almost mean and harsh. But eventually, it's always with the idea that mother bear is going to go, and now that cub needs to take care of finding food for himself. And do you ever see those things? You know what I'm talking about? That God created that for animals, right? Well, He did the same thing for human beings. If He did that for animals, surely He would do that for us. And a lot of what our children learn in the fire is so that when they are actually going to face that in the world as adults, they'll really know how, one, to turn to him, and also know how to process that in the end. So I think that's something that Paul Tripp has constantly hit home, right? Hasn't it been? You have opportunities of ministry when there's hardship in your parenting. But we have to fight our flesh to not be self-centered, to say, I'm too tired, it's 10:30 at night, I'm dead tired, I don't want to deal with you right now, I want to just go to bed, you just shut up and leave me alone and go and do what you do. I'm going to do what I want to do. And that is much more about me than it is about that child and their sin. So I need to really step back and be like, okay, this is an opportunity that God has given to me to prepare my child to love the Lord and to prepare for the world. And teenagers, it's all about that, right? What do you think? Do you see that as well? I mean, that's something he just keeps on pushing.
Oh, I was going to say how many weeks I've been coming and hearing him say the same thing about these are opportunities for ministry. And I know that and I agree with that. And there have been times that I was able to, catch myself. But it's so hard to, not let go of that initial emotion of, what did you just say to me? Or what did you just do? And not address it like I want to, right?
Yeah.
And then I completely forget everything all these notes I took, it's just completely, and I don't even know what to say because I had to stop myself and I said, what was I supposed to do now at this kind of time? It's just, so I think that's what's most difficult is just try to get out of that selfish moment of wanting to just do it the way I want it done, right? And to react with that emotion. So, I mean, that's the hardest part. That's the hardest
That's
part.
what Dan, you said earlier too, right? In the moment. Yeah. The moment's hard.
Like that's, I hear all this over, and it's like I think that's why it's so hard to be at that place of, offering that grace and like that patience and love that they need, because of our self-centeredness. And I know that we need prayer so badly, and to be able to think about it constantly, because even between husband and wife, we're bickering about hypocrisy, about double standards. It's apparent in the sins that are in our own lives, and it's so hard to correct our children when that's so blatant sometimes in our own lives, our own ways of.
Yes. But that is absolutely, and he talked about that, and it's absolutely the main means of allowing wisdom and correction to be beautiful. And let's go back to that. The number one way for our children to know that wisdom and correction is beautiful is to show them how much we treasure it ourselves, because we need it too. Because I'm a sinner and need this. At gleanings, again, I was with teenagers almost for one whole week. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I was with boys, and I'll have to be honest, I went in there thinking, okay, this is going to be hard. I know they're going to really get on my nerves. I was very skeptical in my heart, right, of what it was going to be like. And there were points, I did feel as though I had to say, come on, guys, let's get on the ball here and do that here and there. But there was one incident with one of the guys, and he had just done something that was just immature. I'll put it that way. It's teenage guys. It's like, what do you expect to a certain extent? But he had done something immature, and I reacted to it. My first response I said to him is, stop acting like a 5-year-old. You're not a 5-year-old. I said that to him. I said, you're not a 5-year-old. You can't do this. And I think, man, what have I been learning? I'm already just first dealing, trying to put him down, and then, so anyway, afterward, I was like, Lord, please give me a good time to have a talk with him. So waited for about till the next, that happened in the evening, so the next morning, at a break time, I pulled him aside and I said, hey, can I talk to you for a second? And I was just talking to him, and I said, can I share with you, first I apologized to him for saying what I said. I said, can I share with you why I felt that way? And I was sharing with him how I said, I see in you so much leadership possibilities, and God wants to use you, but the way you're responding to this, it's taking away from what God wants to do with you and for you. And do you see that? And you know what I saw in his eyes and in his face? Utter brokenness. It was really interesting. It was amazing. He said, "You're absolutely right." And this is from a teenage boy who I've been praying for, and he just received that. I was shocked, actually. I think something that he talked about here, he said, do not fall for fatalism. And I have to admit that I have a lot of lack of faith when it comes to people. And it's so easy to say, to pigeonhole someone and say, oh, this kid's like this. They're never gonna, in my mind, I might not say it, but this is not the gospel, though. That's not the gospel. And I saw in that young man a desire, like for a moment, to say, yeah, I was wrong. I was really surprised, actually. And then made me realize I was so fatalistic about that one person. To think, oh, they're never going to change. They're always going to be like that. This is the Holy Spirit. Who can do that? Who can say that God can't do something? So I think we need to get beyond the idea that, oh, they'll never change. Teenagers, they're always going to be rebellious. They're always like this. The gospel is stronger than that. And we have to just believe it. So, going back to what you said, Ellen, is that I think one of our greatest, most powerful tools we have in parenting our teenagers is the tool of grace. And the interesting thing is, it's not showing them grace, it's asking sometimes for grace. That's actually a really powerful tool. To say, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? To your own teenage son or daughter. And when they see that you're a sinner too, something just clicks in them. It's just odd for them because when they receive that first, they'll probably be awkward about it. But deep down inside, something's happening. The Lord is breaking down some of the walls that have been pent up. And so I think that's something we need to see. To make wisdom and correction beautiful, you need to show them why you think it's beautiful for yourself. And when you do that, it'll give them the window as to, wow, if this is so great for you, Mom, you, Dad, and you're sort of like my hero, well, that's pretty cool for me too. I think I can take that. That might take a while to get to, but give that message. I don't think that's going to fall to the ground and die. But the sorry might not be just about direct sin. It could be, I'm sorry I haven't spent enough time with you to spend in your life, to ask good questions. I'm sorry that, maybe Gabriel, I'm sorry I say the same thing over and over, Isaac. Honestly, I love you, I care for you, I want to know about your life. Can we try to think of something that we can do together, to make that something that we can grow together? And maybe I'm not a Transformers guy. Well, I ask him Transformers questions, by the way, and I do the same thing. Yeah, but I ask him always, hey, tell me some of your elvish battle cries, and he'll do it too. He loves it. But maybe it's, I'm sorry, that's something that I want to grow in. I want to grow to love you. That's something I think we need. You know what? Our kids want us to be honest. I think there's something to that, to be genuine with them, to say, this is an area I'm not connecting you with. I want to, please help me to connect you. That's a good thing to ask from our kids. I think that type of genuineness and authenticity is a good thing for our children. I think. Don't you think? Any further thoughts of something that struck you?
How do we prepare for the world? I mean, for like animals, they put the cubs into a certain situation so they can struggle and learn something, right?
Yes.
Like eagles.
Yeah.
What do you normally do? And what is this?
Prepare for the world.
Yeah.
I know. Well, I know for us, one thing is that, media is a part of it. I want our kids to be exposed to, like, we don't put restrictions on the music they listen to per se, but we do tell them, like, I don't say, oh, you're never allowed to listen to secular music or anything like that. And they do. They listen to, they listen to non-Christian music pretty regularly. But we've talked over and over again about what are the values you want to treasure most. And so through that, and we process with them if they're listening to certain things. And, for Carissa, for example, she definitely gets affected by music. So we've had to have significant conversations with her over and over again. I don't want to shield her from that, Gabriel, even though that's been an area of struggle for her personally. Like, music truly affects her, right? But I could have taken the route, Sue and I could have taken the route of, you're never listening to secular music again. Right? I mean, that's sort of the way that generally we work. You create a boundary, and you just put up the walls of that boundary, you never let them struggle with it. But I think there is something to the struggle of things in a safe environment that, so we'll say, let's process things. Like, for example, for some reason, they got really into, I'm ethnically Korean, so they got into Korean dramas. And it started with this one game show, and then, it's always sappy. It's always like, I feel like a lot of these Asian dramas are so certain ways, right? But they got into it, and so we're like, okay, let's watch it together. We'll watch certain movies that, not really highly explicit, but we want to be in a place where we can wrestle with that. So media is one area. Expanding friendships. Like, Carissa and Isaac, they're taking a Spanish class together at Las Positas College. And so before she went in, I said to her, okay, I was driving, and here's one of my driving moments, and I said, Chris, I want you to know that you're going into an environment where generally some of the kids are smoking pot. She never even smelled pot until she visited campus for the first time. And then Sue said there was like pot in the bathroom. So we were like, okay, you can smell pot. Kids are going to have certain language, and she knows that language. And then I also said, if anyone says anything explicit to you or does anything, you need to. So I have to have these type of conversations, and I think it's important to do that without saying, oh, you should never be in a non-Christian environment. Constantly having the conversations is important versus shielding them completely from that. And there is a balance between that. And Dan, how do you feel like, Tracy, how do you feel like you've done that? Like, for example, Kayla works at Pete's, right? At Pete's, you have a pretty wide environment. I don't know, I'm assuming some of her coworkers might be gay, or they have a completely different worldview, right?
Sure.
She's also interacting with different people. So that's truly a place where you're preparing her for the world, but at the same time, you don't want her to like go to, say, some rave party where everyone's taking ecstasy and doing things either, right? So how do you engage that?
Well, when it comes to things like media and music, we also see the connection. It's not music, but books. So rather than saying, stop reading these top 10 fiction bestsellers, or like Gone Girl, I've seen her read that. So rather than have a list of yeses or nos, what we've said is, what you read has an effect on how you think. And we've seen her behavior affect her self-centeredness affected by what she sets her mind on. So we've mentioned it in that sort of a context. So I don't think we've really restricted her life in terms of do's and don'ts. And yes, she has been exposed to a lot of different types of people. She's seen sin, people cheating, stealing, that she probably would not have seen. So I think it's been good for her to think that through and then talk to us about it at home.
Right.
tell them not to be surprised.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess preparing for the world, I don't know. I don't really have an answer for that. I think what I'm realizing is that our time is running out.
Yeah, your time is running out.
Yeah.
But I think, like for example, Kayla working at Pete's, I do think that that's a great opportunity to what Paul Tripp was talking about, which is to struggle in the safe environment of the home. Because eventually that is the world, and that's what Sue and I have told Carissa. You're in the world. We're never going to pull you out of it, because that's not what Christ calls us to. He doesn't tell us to go to live in a monastery. We're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world, and that is something that is a reality. So I think what you both have done, and the key is asking those questions, engaging, not pulling out. It's so easy to be passive. I feel like that's the danger. Passivity is the truest danger from a parental perspective, because never assume that there's no influence of something. Its influences are all around. You just have to engage and ask questions and say, what are you thinking about? What are you learning? Books.
It's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah.
It's so easy to be passive.
It is.
It's so hard to be, on top of it when you're like so busy running around, work, this, that. There's like no time.
Yeah.
You have to make time.
Yeah. Well, Tina,
It's so easy to be passive.
I feel like it's easy because, you know what, and Dan, you brought up a great point, books. In all of our, everyone here is Asian, and we grew up with an educational ethos, so generally books are good. Reading, you just want your kids to read. Just read anything, don't worry, I don't care, just read something versus playing a video game. I just want you to read, right? But the one thing we don't realize is that they are reading something, and reading is truly an intake of something. The challenge is, do we ask questions about it?
You can't read every book that
You can't. You cannot.
You can't screen it.
But it is important, like, for example, to think about asking questions, but it takes time and effort. It takes not just time. I would say more than time, it takes effort. And the effort is something that we're just busy and tired, so we don't want to do that because it's hard. But the car ride is a good place for that, right? And we need to take advantage of the opportunities we do have. We just don't. So passivity again, I don't believe that there are some things that are clearly morally wrong. Like I wouldn't send Carissa to a rave party that had ecstasy in it. You know what I mean? It's just not something I would say, no, you can't go to that. There are certain ground rules that I would have. But then there are some places where I might say, I'm okay with that. And sometimes Sue, and I don't know how you all are between husband and wife, but there are definitely times where Sue and I have different thresholds. Do you all have the same thresholds with your spouse? Because we have different thresholds of what is allowable and what is not. Do you all have the same thresholds? No? Do you have the same thresholds? Do you both? Similar? Do you both? So you have different. Sue and I have very.
But I think it's also that we haven't had those conversations between us enough, and just today we're contemplating about where we should set limits, and because it's not something we had a chance to talk about. We're kind of like doing it as it comes along, and sometimes it happens before we have gotten a chance to talk about it.
Yes. So what allows you to set the threshold is the idea of reactive versus goal-oriented, right? So if it's reactive, then let's say Arden or Jack they're just playing video games all day, right? You're just tired of them playing video games, and you start setting up a rule. All right, you can only play at this time, or you can't play during the school year, whatever it might be. But what if I have a different standard than my spouse, right? To me, that happens with Sue and I quite often, where she'll say, like, she tends to be a little bit more of the rule setter. I tend to be more of the open up and let's allow for the messiness to be there. That's the distinctive differences between Sue and I. So because of that, it lends itself to some challenges because we have to go back. Like she'll set up a quick rule, and then I'll be like, I don't want that rule there, because to me the rule sometimes does more damage than the liberty. And so then we have to go back and have a conversation and discuss, okay, what are we trying to say, and then we move forward again. So do you have those type of conversations, or? I think you should have those conversations. You should know together why you're doing what you're doing. Again, that's the passivity and the reactive versus the goal-oriented. Because if the goal is, I want my children to know the Lord, and so that when they leave the home, they're going to follow him, then the two of you are always trying to work out what that looks like in almost everything that you're doing. I know that sounds really challenging, but we spend so much time driving our kids to this practice or putting them into this tutoring session or to, if we're willing to do that for all their academic career, what about their spiritual souls? What about their soul? So surely we should have the ability to say, this is worth investing in time and energy and effort, right? As much as their academic career or their physical material success. So being intentional about the goal and then saying, what are we doing that is leading toward that goal, and what are we taking away? And it could be video games. It could be as simple as that. What they're reading, what they're watching, who their friends are. I'm not saying we should be ruling over that. We should just I should be on the same page with Sua as to how we're going to process all that together. How we're going to bring that together. What do you all think about that?
So when you guys have like totally different views, how do you come to an agreement? I mean, the fact that with a lot of issues in marriages too, right?
Yeah.
So
we go back to.
I don't know how to come to an agreement a lot of times because he and I are so different.
I usually give in.
Yeah, I don't want to
usually gives in, right?
Usually give in.
Yeah. I still think that comes down to, and this is where it asks bigger questions. To me, the biggest question is, what's your greatest foundation? Because if I can at least agree with that, then we start at the bottom and we work our way up. If our greatest foundation is we want to honor the Lord, that's an easy foundation to work with, right? Because if we say that, then, okay, how do I get to that place? And so if, let's say, our greatest desire is to honor the Lord, not necessarily parenting, but to honor the Lord, and let's say it's about video games, and because here, real life example. So Jack was playing Clash of Clans, and there's a text board on it, and Sua wants him to. It's interesting because she feels like he's getting really bad writing style from writing on this text board because he doesn't capitalize the I and he doesn't use full sentences. So she said to him, "No more texting on that board because you don't know how to write now because of that, right?" So I said, all right, hold on. We went back and I had a conversation. I said, Sua, I know that he needs to improve his writing, but I think setting up a rule of that doesn't necessarily lead to that. Secondarily, I don't know if that's the answer to it all. And thirdly is that I'm wondering if that's going to exasperate him, to the point where we're setting up this rule. So, and the exasperation is I don't want him to ultimately turn to us or to the Lord and say, you're just about a bunch of rules. So we go back to that. I bring her to that place. She sees that and says, okay, you're right. Let's just figure out another way to do that. And it's, all right, so when we say when you write in there, you have to use full sentences. With correct grammar, right?
Different kind of rule.
Yeah. Well, but it doesn't take away what he really wants, which is to be able to communicate with people, right? Because that's his ultimate desire. We don't want to take away the ultimate desire, but we want him to learn the lesson too. But the exasperation is what guides us, but it's ultimately our foundation on the Lord because we don't want him to turn away from the Lord ultimately and to see God like that. That's what I mean is you go back to your foundation and then you can start processing it, and that helps the person because even kids are like that and adults. If you can explain the why, it becomes a lot more reasonable to actually accede to it, right? So then it's, I give in, but if it's, here's why I think we should do this, and eventually it clicks your mind, you say, that makes sense to me. You're willing to give in, and you give in freely, versus I give in because you're my boss. I always do what you say. I mean, then that leads to bitterness in your heart that no one sees. That's what usually causes problems in marriage, is when you give in because you're being forced to or you're just struggling, and then therefore slowly, it's like, why am I always giving in? Why am I always giving in? So that's what I would say. That's why I think the foundation is the key. But that's a whole nother story. I think I want us to leave here with a few ideas of what Paul Tripp said. One is that you're preparing your child to leave the home, especially sons. I know I just believe this from a biblical worldview is that I think for daughters, my daughters have an opportunity in this country to study, to get a job, to do whatever they can. And, we're doing all that we can as parents to give them that opportunity. Sue and I are. And I have 3 daughters. But if, let's say, one of them said, you know what, and Sarah always says this, so she says, I'm not getting married. I'm not getting married. She says that. I'm not leaving the home.
Exactly like her.
Yeah.
Voice too.
No, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. I'm not getting married. She says that to us. And let's say that actually happened, we wouldn't kick her out. Because ultimately, if she doesn't marry someone, I'm the head over her, regardless of her age. I'm her father. So I would still protect her. I would still provide for her. I would still care for her, regardless of her age. I would hope that wouldn't happen, but for a son, there's a reason why in Genesis chapter 2, where it says, that a man shall leave his father and mother and shall become one flesh with his wife, because it is God's intended plan that the man leave the family to go and lead another family, and that he has that responsibility. And it's interesting how that plays out with men anyway. Sue is definitely closer to her family than I am to mine. Like, I don't call my parents as much as she does. Any of you guys call more than your wife, your parents? Anyone? Do you?
She talks about parents more than I do.
Dan?
I think the same. She calls more.
She calls more. John? Do you talk to your parents more, or does John talk to his parents more?
No, I call him.
Yeah. John?
Well, maybe a little bit better, but I'm not that good.
But you're better than he is.
Yes.
Anne, are you better, or John?
Probably.
Yeah. I think about it. This is a small sample size, but it's just true. I mean, it really is across the board. So, especially if you have sons, we have a real grave responsibility to prepare them to leave the home. And that is the one thing for Jack I'm always thinking about. That's why, like, my girls, if they succeed and do all these things, that's great, but I'm okay with them coming back home. But for Jack, I'm not expecting him I don't want him to come back home when he's gone. I don't want him to be 40 living in my home. In fact, I will boot him out. No, that's for his soul. It's not just for his own good, but it's for his soul. I've found very few men who are 40 years old, living at home, and are honoring the Lord faithfully. It just doesn't happen that way. And God didn't intend for it to be that way. So we have to prepare our children to leave their home. And the teen years, you're in the last phases of doing that. So you can't waste this time. Don't waste it by being so tired. And I'm preaching to myself right now. I cannot waste this time. Yeah, and I'll talk to you something, because we've talked about like some of the challenges of a difficult team. So something that I want to talk to you about that, since I don't want to keep everyone. But the last thing is remember that do not be passive. Let's fight the good fight. Let me pray for us. Father, we have a wonderful, wonderful privilege of parenting our children through all the years. But for those of us who are now parenting our teens, I guess what we need most, oh Lord, is to be able to see our own souls in this process. And perhaps one of the reasons why this is the most challenging years from a worldly perspective is that our teenagers so often mirror our own hearts. And they show us in many ways how we lack love, grace, energy, persistence, perseverance, faithfulness. Lord, help us to see that you have been so faithful to us, and that's what we want to convey to our children. We want our teenagers to really to make a difference in this world and to live life for the glory of God. And for those who are really struggling, oh Lord, with their teenagers, I pray that you would give us absolute faith, that we would not be fatalistic, but faithful, that we would absolutely trust that you can change hearts and minds, and you're the one who transforms, not us. Help us not to be afraid. Lord, too often parents are afraid of these years, but your word tells us perfect love casts out fear, and we should not be afraid of this time, but we should be anticipatory to this exciting time of life. And Lord, I pray that 10 years from today, we would all look back and see how you have led us through. You have been with us. Thank you for our teenage sons and daughters. And may they be a new generation that is living out the gospel. That only happens when they themselves see it, and may they see it in us as well. So we commit our hearts and lives to you, and we thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Next week is the last week of our time together, and we actually end with a lot of great other things, so we want to encourage you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
How's life?
Bye-bye. Do you think Ultron can defeat Optimus Prime?
That's a very good question.